For as long as horror has existed, studios have mastered the art of misdirection. They've hidden unsettling truths behind cheerful artwork, softened terrifying narratives with comforting color palettes, and disguised bleak stories beneath posters that seemed almost harmless. Many audiences walked into theaters expecting familiar thrills guided by advertisements that promised something digestible, only to find themselves blindsided by films far more ruthless than anything the marketing hinted at. These posters weren't simply misleading. They were calculated shields designed to mask narratives that might have scared viewers away before they ever bought a ticket. In an era when censorship boards hovered over every release and public backlash could destroy a film overnight, studios learned how to weaponize deception. They crafted images that looked lighter, safer, and more palatable than the films themselves. The artwork became a kind of camouflage, welcoming the unsuspecting viewer, then abandoning them once the story revealed its true, much darker nature. For many moviegoers, the shock was part of the experience, the realization that the poster had told one story while the film was quietly whispering a much more disturbing one. Tonight we're stepping into that space between illusion and reality. These are the 15 horror films that hid behind misleading posters, movies advertised as tame, playful, or conventional, only to plunge their audiences into far deeper shadows than anyone expected. What you saw on the wall of the theater lobby was never the whole truth. Number 1, Alice, Sweet Alice, 1976. The poster for Alice, Sweet Alice is deceptively striking: a plastic mask with a childlike grin, a bright raincoat, and colors that evoke a twisted fairy tale more than a grim psychological nightmare. It suggests a stylized slasher where a mysterious child commits violent acts beneath a playful veneer. But anyone who steps into the film quickly realizes how far removed this imagery is from its actual tone. What unfolds is an unflinching examination of religious guilt, emotional neglect, and a community consumed by paranoia. The marketing never hinted at the suffocating Catholic symbolism, the oppressive rituals, or the emotional fractures tearing through the characters' lives. The violence, rather than being sensational or theatrical, is raw and distressingly personal. The story is less about a masked assailant and more about the corrosive environment that shapes every character's perception, including the way a young girl becomes the town's scapegoat long before the truth emerges. As the mystery deepens, the bright, almost whimsical artwork becomes a haunting contrast to the film's grim reality. Scenes of accusation, betrayal, and misunderstanding accumulate, revealing a world where innocence is fragile and easily sacrificed. The poster promises eccentricity, but the film delivers a bruising portrait of a community collapsing under its own moral rigidity. Alice, Sweet Alice remains unforgettable precisely because its marketing masked a story far darker, heavier, and more human than advertised. Number 2, He Knows You're Alone, 1980. The poster for He Knows You're Alone borrows the familiar language of early slasher advertising: an ominous silhouette, a blade catching the light, and a frightened young woman framed as the target of an inevitable attack. It suggests a film built around big scares and violent confrontations, a straightforward thriller where a masked killer stalks victims through suburban nights. Yet the movie itself takes a far quieter path. Instead of leaning into gore or elaborate kills, it builds dread through restraint, turning the simple act of being watched into the film's most potent terror. The marketing campaign avoids acknowledging just how subdued and introspective the film really is. It hides the long stretches of silence, the creeping paranoia that settles over the characters, and the unsettling normalcy of the killer himself. This isn't a villain shaped by theatrical costume or iconic presence. He is chilling because he feels painfully real, a figure who exists in the margins, observing without emotion and striking without flourish. For viewers expecting adrenaline-fueled slasher mayhem, the shift in tone came as a surprise. The film relies on tension rather than spectacle, using anticipation as its weapon. Every lingering shot, every slow pan magnifies the feeling that danger is present even when nothing is happening. By selling the movie as something louder and bloodier, the poster inadvertently amplified the shock of its quietness. He knows you're alone endures because its fear is grounded not in the knife it depicts, but in the silence it hides. Number 3, Humongous 1982. The poster for Humongous screams old-school creature feature wrapped in the bold typography and pulpy exaggeration of early 80s monster marketing. The imagery implies a roaring beast stalking its prey on a remote island, a film built on spectacle, oversized terror, and primal thrills. But those who pressed play quickly learned how misleading that promise truly was. Instead of delivering chaotic monster mayhem, the film retreats into something far more somber, a tragedy born from brutality shaped by the aftermath of an assault that the marketing never dared acknowledge. The artwork completely abandons the emotional underpinnings of the narrative. It avoids any suggestion that the creature's existence stems from violence, isolation, and a lifetime of feral survival rather than from supernatural origins. The movie's tension rises not through monstrous roar or dramatic reveal, but through the unsettling quiet that fills the island, the feeling that every shadow is soaked in the residue of old wounds. Violence arrives in short, brutal bursts, never glamorized, never stylized, reflecting the bleak truth behind the creature's creation. For viewers expecting B-movie excess, this realization was jarring. The island's desolate landscape, its abandoned structures, and the characters' growing unease give the film a weight that the poster's pulpy design actively obscures. Rather than a fun monster romp, Humongous becomes a grim reminder of how trauma can distort life into something unrecognizable. The poster sells a beast. The film reveals a wound. Number 4, The Initiation 1984. The marketing for The Initiation frames it as a classic slice of campus horror pranks, pledges, and the chaotic energy of Greek life traditions. Bright colors, ritualistic motifs, and group imagery suggest a film rooted in collegiate antics, disrupted by a lurking threat. It gives off the impression of a slasher structured around sorority games and nighttime dares, familiar and formulaic in a comforting way. But beneath that facade lies a story carved from psychological distress, fractured memory, and long-hidden truth. The trailer and posters carefully avoid the film's internal focus, a protagonist haunted by disturbing dreams, torn between fragments of her past and the reality she desperately tries to piece together. The sorority angle is presented as the core, but in truth, it is merely a gateway into a story shaped by trauma rather than mischief. As the narrative progresses, the emphasis shifts from college life to the protagonist's unraveling identity, blurring the line between imagination and memory. Viewers who entered expecting pranks and predictable slasher beats discovered a narrative far more introspective. The violence isn't celebratory or exaggerated, it's the manifestation of an emotional wound resurfacing after years of suppression. The marketing's clean collegiate packaging becomes a striking contrast to the film's darker intentions. The Initiation hides a psychological labyrinth behind a familiar genre shell, inviting viewers in with promises of fun before revealing a story built on fear, confusion, and the dangerous weight of forgotten history. Number 5, The House on Sorority Row 1983. The poster for the house on Sorority Row is drenched in the glossy aesthetics of early 80s campus slashers, stylish lighting a group of glamorous young women, and the unmistakable suggestion of a wild night gone wrong. It promises a fashionable blend of mischief, danger, and youthful rebellion, hinting at a story that's sharp, stylish, and ultimately fun. But the tone within the film is anything but carefree. Beneath the sorority house decor and neon framing lies a grim narrative centered on guilt, silence, and the emotional wreckage left by a prank that spirals out of control. The promotional material omits the psychological pressure cooker at the film's core. It ignores the mounting dread, the paranoia gripping each character, and the solemn realization that their impulsive actions have bound them to a secret too heavy to share. Rather than leaning into lighthearted slasher tropes, the movie creates tension through unraveling trust and the unbearable fear of exposure. Every death feels like a consequence rather than a genre ornament. For viewers expecting a high-energy college thriller, the film's seriousness hits unexpectedly hard. The sorority house, portrayed in ads as a place of stylish chaos, becomes a claustrophobic chamber where guilt festers and loyalties fracture. Even the killer's presence feels like an extension of their conscience rather than a simple antagonist. The house on Sorority Row subverts its glossy marketing by delivering a story built on dread and emotional collapse, turning a seemingly playful premise into a somber, memorable horror tale. Number 6. The Mutilator, 1984. The advertising for The Mutilator suggests a rowdy, over-the-top slasher dripping with camp value. With its bright coloring, exaggerated weaponry, and almost playful body language, the poster promises a loud, goofy horror film meant for beer-soaked gatherings and weekend marathons. But behind that deceptively cheerful facade lies a story steeped in bitterness and emotional violence. The film's tone is far from the winking energy its artwork implies. Instead, it presents a bleak tale born from an old tragedy, a wound that never healed and slowly curdled into rage. The promotional imagery never hints at the somber prologue that shapes everything that follows. It ignores the lingering grief, the fractured family dynamic, and the heavy silence that hangs over the characters as they return to the beach house. When the killing begins, it isn't gleeful or theatrical. The brutality feels personal, as though each blow is an echo of unresolved anguish. The kills linger longer than expected, not because they're outlandish, but because they feel uncomfortably intimate. Many viewers approach the film expecting garish fun, only to be confronted by a slasher that seems almost mournful beneath the bloodshed. The isolation of the setting, cold docks, empty rooms, quiet nights, contrasts sharply with the poster's almost comic book bravado. It's this divide that gives The Mutilator its strange power, a film sold as disposable entertainment, but delivered as something far darker, shaped by grief rather than gimmicks. The bright artwork becomes a mask hiding a story weighed down by sorrow and unresolved trauma. Number 7. Mortuary, 1983. The poster for Mortuary leans hard into supernatural suggestion, ghostly hands clawing from below mist, curling through grave markers, and occult symbolism hinting at restless spirits. Anyone seeing the artwork would expect a full-blown tale of undead forces or ritual horrors rising from the dark. But the film's actual story is grounded almost entirely in human manipulation and twisted obsession. Instead of paranormal terror, viewers are led into a web of fragile emotions, deception, and a killer driven by all too human impulses. The marketing leaned heavily on essences and graveyard imagery, positioning the movie within the supernatural boom of the era. Yet inside the film, these sequences serve mainly as red herrings. The genuine threat stems from personal betrayal, grief, and a mind unraveling beneath emotional strain. The violence is intimate, rather than mythic, driven by motives that have nothing to do with the occult forces the poster emphasizes. For audiences who walked in anticipating ghosts or demonic presence, the reveal felt jarring. The kills unfold quietly, without spectacle, reinforcing the grounded nature of the threat. Even the twist ending quick, sharp, and energetic aligns more with slasher tradition than the paranormal themes advertised. In the end, the poster's supernatural veneer becomes an elaborate mask concealing a story far more rooted in human darkness. Mortuary remains a striking case of misleading marketing, a ghost story on the outside, a psychological thriller at its core. Number 8. Curtains, 1983. The marketing for Curtains trades heavily on visual elegance, velvet drapery, theatrical lighting, and a sense of refined performance that promises a stylish, almost operatic horror film. It suggests a slasher set inside the world of artistic ambition, where every kill is choreographed with the precision of a stage production. But the film bears little resemblance to that polished exterior. What audiences actually encounter is a fractured, eerie descent into jealousy, insecurity, and the emotional wreckage left behind by a tumultuous production. The poster avoids every unsettling element that has made the film a cult curiosity: the surreal doll, the masked figure skating silently across a frozen lake, the dreamlike transitions caused by reshuffled scenes and cast changes. Instead, the studio leaned into class and sophistication, selling the illusion of a neatly packaged thriller. In reality, the film's chaotic construction gives it an unpredictable edge. Characters drift in and out, tones shift abruptly, and tension builds through disorientation rather than rhythm. This discrepancy left many first-time viewers unprepared for the film's darker, more fragmented nature. Instead of the poised slasher promised by the artwork, they found a cold, unnerving atmosphere defined by ambition curdling into madness. The poster's elegance feels like deliberate misdirection, draping a troubled, jagged nightmare in a facade of theatrical dignity. Curtains endures precisely because of this contrast, an aesthetically refined shell hiding a story carved out of fear, rivalry, and psychological unraveling. Number 9. The Majorettes, 1987. The poster for The Majorettes radiates bright school colors and clean, youthful imagery, making it look like a typical 1980s cheerleader slasher, simple, energetic, and geared toward fans of lightweight VHS horror. Its marketing suggests pep squad theatrics interrupted by a masked killer, as if the film will follow familiar teen slasher rhythms from start to finish. But once the story unfolds, the deception becomes clear. Instead of a playful parade of genre tropes, viewers are pulled into a bleak tapestry of manipulation, predatory adults, and a community where corruption thrives behind respectable facades. The promotional materials never hinted at the layered structure within the narrative: drug scandals, controlling authority figures, and a deep-rooted cynicism that overshadows the entire town. The murders aren't staged for camp value or genre fun. They're sharp, sudden eruptions born from emotional rot and moral neglect. As the tension builds, the film abruptly shifts gears, abandoning its superficial slasher setup for a revenge-driven final act that feels far more bruising than anything the poster suggests. For many who encountered the film expecting a breezy slice of 80s horror, the stark tonal shift was startling. The poster's cheerful, athletic poses and bright palette become almost mocking once the story reveals its true intentions. What seemed like a simple high school thriller transforms into a grim portrait of exploitation and retribution. The Majorettes may look like easy entertainment on its cover, but the film itself delivers a surprisingly harsh indictment of the people who hide behind authority and the teenagers caught in their shadow. Number 10, Happy Birthday to Me, 1981. Few horror posters have been as iconic and as misleading as the one for Happy Birthday to Me. The infamous image of a boy skewered by a shish kebab instantly branded the film as outrageous, campy, and gleefully excessive. It promised a carnival of bizarre kills and an irreverent sense of fun highly characteristic of early 80s slasher marketing. But the film behind this sensational artwork is far more intricate. Beneath its flashy reputation lies a psychological puzzle built around fractured memories, suppressed trauma, and a protagonist whose mind is slowly crumbling beneath the weight of her past. The marketing painted the film as an over-the-top spectacle, a wild ride designed to shock and entertain. Instead, the story unfolds with deliberate patience, weaving a mystery through distorted recollections and haunting flashbacks. The deaths, though, striking, serve as pieces of a larger emotional riddle rather than isolated acts of gore. The film's tone leans toward melancholy and paranoia, stripping away the celebratory energy implied by the poster's theatrics. Audiences expecting non-stop outrageous kills were confronted instead with a somber narrative exploring identity, manipulation, and the fragile boundary between reality and delusion. Even the poster's signature kebab kill, one of the most recognizable images in horror advertising, barely reflects the film's true mood. Happy Birthday to Me hides its sorrow behind a flamboyant mask, leaving viewers with an experience far heavier than the marketing ever suggested. Number 11, American Gothic, 1987. The poster for American Gothic projects an air of eccentric menace, oddly posed characters, farm country iconography, and a stylized tone that hints at dark humor rather than true horror. It suggests something theatrical, maybe even quirky, as though the film leans more toward macabre comedy than psychological devastation. But what the audience finds beyond that playful fade is a deeply unsettling tale of fanaticism and emotional decay. The movie trades irony for despair, building a world where innocence is twisted and beliefs calcify into cruelty. Nothing in the marketing touches the severity of this world. It avoids the strict moral rigidity that governs the family at the film's center, the lingering trauma shaping their actions, and the sense of suffocation that envelops anyone who steps onto the isolated homestead. Instead of an exaggerated horror romp, viewers encounter a story drenched in bleakness where repression suffocates reason and the protagonist is drawn into a spiral of madness far removed from what the poster implies. For those expecting eccentric characters and campy tension, the severity of the film's emotional violence came as a shock. Its atmosphere grows increasingly oppressive as the family's worldview reveals itself, turning every interaction into a quiet threat. By the time the protagonist's mind begins to fracture, the film has abandoned any trace of the quirkiness suggested by its artwork. American Gothic stands as one of the clearest examples of marketing that performed a deliberate softening, masking a story far harsher and more emotionally bruising than the poster ever admitted. Number 12, The Dorm That Dripped Blood, 1982. At first glance, the promotional art for The Dorm That Dripped Blood seems predictable: a dark figure looming overhead, splashes of red, and the unmistakable promise of a conventional campus slasher. To anyone browsing a video shelf in the 1980s, it would have blended seamlessly with other late-night horror rentals, loud, bloody, and uncomplicated. But the actual film takes a far grimmer turn. Instead of a playful or stylized slasher, viewers are pulled into a bleak, almost suffocating world where the violence feels startlingly raw and the atmosphere is soaked in despair. The marketing emphasized movement and chaos, giving the illusion of a fast-paced thriller. Yet the movie thrives on stillness, abandoned buildings, dim corridors, and a sense of abandonment that creeps in from the very first scene. There is little of the genre's usual rhythm or energy. Instead, the film leans into a gritty, unpolished tone that makes its brutality feel uncomfortably close to reality. The characters aren't framed as colorful stereotypes, but as vulnerable people slowly realizing how isolated they truly are. Viewers who arrived expecting a typical slasher quickly found themselves trapped in a much darker narrative. The violence lands harder because it lacks theatrical flourish. The hopelessness settles in because the poster never warned them what was coming. By the time the final twist unfolds, cold, merciless, and abrupt, the marketing's cheerful deception feels almost cruel. The dorm that dripped blood is remembered not for what its poster promised, but for how drastically it diverged from that promise. Number 13, Sweet 16, 1983. The marketing for Sweet 16 leaned heavily into the aesthetics of early 80s teen horror, neon accents, bright headshots, and a title that practically promises a coming-of-age slasher laced with playful menace. The artwork creates an expectation of a lightweight thriller focused on adolescent drama and weekend shocks. But the story concealed behind that vibrant facade is far more somber. Instead of breezy genre entertainment, the film reveals a tense and emotionally charged exploration of prejudice, misunderstanding, and the destructive consequences of fear. The poster avoided every difficult topic woven into the narrative. It made no mention of the cultural tensions simmering just beneath the surface, nor the way the film examines how suspicion mutates into violence. Viewers anticipating a straightforward slasher found themselves navigating a drama infused with social commentary where the murders feel like tragic offshoots of an already fractured community. The victims are not simply genre archetypes. They're people caught in circumstances shaped by bias and misperception. As the film unravels, the tone grows steadily darker. Each violent moment feels rooted not in sensationalism, but in emotional instability and cultural conflict. The marketing's bright, youthful energy becomes a cruel contrast to the film's tragic core. By the time the truth emerges, the poster's misleading charm feels almost disorienting, like a mask designed to hide the film's true intentions.
Sweet 16 remains a powerful example of a movie whose lighthearted visuals disguise a deeply uneasy heart.
Number 14, The Silent Scream, 1979. The imagery used to promote The Silent Scream suggested a typical sunlit coastal slasher, bright exteriors, young faces, and the promise of energetic thrills in a scenic seaside setting. Nothing about the poster hinted at the oppressive atmosphere or the psychological weight that defines the film's core. Those who came expecting a light, fast-moving slasher instead found themselves swallowed by a story steeped in dread, isolation, and family secrets buried within a decaying mansion perched above the water. The promotional campaign carefully skirted around the film's darkest material. It hid the fragile mental state of its characters, the unsettling presence of the domineering matriarch, and the labyrinth of locked rooms that conceal years of emotional damage. The trailer emphasized movement and momentum, distracting from the stillness and paranoia that actually drive the narrative. When violence arrives, it does so not with stylized flourish, but with abrupt, jarring force that feels deliberately out of step with the poster's promise of familiar slasher fun. This mismatch struck audiences with unexpected intensity. The warm visuals used to sell the film dissolved the moment the characters stepped into the mansion's suffocating halls. What followed was a steady descent into madness, where the boundaries between victim and captor blur and the sense of safety evaporates. The Silent Scream endures because its marketing set a trap, one that lulled viewers with sunshine and youth before plunging them into a claustrophobic nightmare that the poster never dared to reveal. Number 15, The Baby, 1973. At a glance, the poster for the baby gives almost nothing away. Its soft, inviting design resembles the cover of an offbeat drama or a quirky human interest story, something eccentric, perhaps even sentimental. Viewers encountering the artwork for the first time might assume they're in for a lightly strange domestic tale. But what waits inside the film is something far more warped. Instead of gentle oddity, the baby drags its audience into a world of psychological domination, unsettling dependency, and a family dynamic so twisted it borders on the nightmarish. The promotional materials avoided every difficult truth embedded in the narrative. Nowhere did they hint at the adult man forced into infantile submission or the family's obsessive need to keep him trapped in a manufactured childhood. Nothing suggested the manipulation, emotional violence, or quiet malice that shapes every moment of the film. By masking these elements behind harmless aesthetics, the poster performed an act of erasure, erasing the horror, the cruelty, and the disturbing power play at the film's center. For many viewers, the realization came slowly. What began as puzzling soon became suffocating, each scene peeling back layers of control and desperation that the marketing never even whispered about. And by the time the story reaches its final chilling revelation, the poster's misleading gentleness feels almost sinister, like a lure deliberately designed to catch an unsuspecting audience off guard. The baby remains infamous not only for its content, but for the way that its deceptively calm presentation made the eventual horror feel twice as shocking. BONUSFILM Lady in a Cage, 1964. The promotional artwork for Lady in a Cage suggests a refined mid-century thriller, stylized compositions, elegant typography, and the poised presence of Olivia de Havilland front and center. It evokes the atmosphere of a polished psychological drama, the kind Hollywood frequently produced in the early 1960s. Yet nothing in that graceful presentation prepares the viewer for the raw brutality that surges through the film itself. What begins with the inconvenience of a malfunctioning home elevator quickly mutates into a vicious, claustrophobic ordeal that strips away every trace of its supposed sophistication. The poster hides the sheer desperation baked into the story. It never hints at the savagery of the intruders who break into the trapped woman's home, nor the chaotic spiral of violence, humiliation, and terror that unfolds once they realize she is at their mercy. The elegance of the advertising is miles away from the film's gritty heart. A world where the thin membrane of civility cracks the moment an opportunity for cruelty arises. De Havilland's character is not locked in a polite battle of wits, as the marketing suggests. She is fighting for survival inside a cage that was never meant to hold anything more than convenience. For viewers expecting a sleek suspense piece in the tradition of Hitchcock, the tonal shift was jarring. Instead of measured tension, they received a blistering portrayal of societal decay where opportunists, drifters, and predators descend on vulnerability with frightening speed. The film's violence is not operatic but virile, highlighting the brutality simmering just beneath the surface of ordinary life. Lady in a Cage remains one of the most startling disconnects between poster and film, a polished advertisement cloaking a story that screams with chaos and cruelty. If these films taught us anything, it's that the brightest posters often hide the darkest truths. If you want to keep uncovering the stories that slip through Hollywood's cracks, those buried edits, vanishing cuts, and carefully disguised horrors, stay with us. Subscribe, share this episode with someone who still trusts movie artwork, and return for more hidden histories. The posters lied, but the evidence waiting in the shadows never does.